strange question. Is the AI trade dead? With a rally like this, obviously not.
Not dead, simply catching its breath. Look, it's very confusing. One day a company is punished for capital expenditures. The next day they're rewarding. So it's not a surprise we're all scratching our head here. And they are spending $900 billion in CapEx this year and $1.2 trillion next year. But I'll submit to you, literally, the smartest people in the room are the ones opening their checkbooks. And they realize once the compute's there, once the supply has met the demand, not unlike Amazon years ago when they decided to turn the profit spigots on, you're going to see the mother of all profit spigots as a result of this. So it's not dead. It's alive and well.
But that's an interesting expression. You're going to see the mother of all profits, profit spigot this year.
That's right. Well, not this year, in the years ahead. So they're going to build and build and build, because when you build it, it will come. And when they finally are ready to pull that lever in terms of exacting profits for it, you're going to see a massive profit wave. So you think about those that are writing the checks for AI, companies like mine, they're not just doing it because everyone's doing it. They're already seeing intangible and now tangible benefits and results. So those that are supplying it are in the catbird seat, and those of us that are using it are doing things in minutes that used to take us hours, if not days.
We've been talking, you and I and others on the show recently, about this particular quarter. Profits are going to be up well over 20% compared to 1 year ago.
Nearly 30.
Nearly 30.
Right.
That's huge. And you're talking about turning on the mother of all profit spigots maybe next year. What kind of profit increases are you going to see? 40%, 50%? What do you
Well, for the hyperscalers, that's entirely possible. So enough of this blame game about the volatility last week or 2 weeks ago being predicated on the AI trade being over. If that were the case, earnings estimates would be going down. They keep on going up for that cohort.
You never hear that. Well, you do on Wall Street. You hear it there, but you don't hear it on Main Street.
Because it's a convenient excuse. The real excuse was all the leverage out there, and that's still a problem.
Yeah, we're spending too much. We don't like data centers.
Right now, what you're seeing is kind of the bull market investor's dream scenario. You want to lay that out for why you think that this is something that you would continue to buy here?
Yeah, Becky, there's been a lot to like about this market. You're seeing just explosive earnings growth. Just looking this morning, we're about halfway through this quarter's earnings season, and we've got 47% earnings growth. Like, I thought last quarter was good at 28%. The estimate for this quarter was 18%, and we're now looking at an 86% beat rate. What's more is that we're seeing this great rotation play out across markets. You're seeing almost the revenge of value investing. This is a pitch we've been waiting for a long time, with now value handily outperforming growth. Small and mid caps participating, international stocks doing well. In the meantime, you just aren't really seeing massive euphoria in the market. You know, you look at the forward PE ratio on the S&P 500, and it's less than 20 times right now. So valuations are coming down at the same time that stock prices are going up. So we're seeing a lot to like. Diversification finally kicking in. The biggest challenge is that typically when things are this good and the economy is holding in pretty well at the same time, is that inflation usually picks up. So I think the biggest risk to all of this great news is that the Fed potentially does need to come through with more hawkish behavior here, maybe raise rates 2 times this year. And that's really the only thing that we think could stop all of these great fundamental drivers for equities today.
Would that change your opinion on whether people should be buyers if the Fed were actually to raise rates?
Yeah, it would. It depends on how much. So right now, the bond market is pricing at a 67% chance of a hike in September, and then really sort of oscillating between whether or not the Fed hikes in December. We think that the Fed, the economy and the markets could certainly handle 1. 2 is sort of where this issue comes in. And Becky, the reason for that is that there is this unbelievable need for liquidity right now. These hyperscalers, whether it's issuing debt, issuing equity, whatever it is to fuel these growth plans, at the same time that markets are contending with whether or not there should be a blank checkbook there. You've got the Fed, sort of colliding with this. The Fed has provided liquidity to this market, market. But if we're looking at something like 2 hikes, the cost of capital goes up and that starts to fade. So it really depends on how these two forces collide. But for now, this incredible earnings we think is enough to see equity sort of win that battle.
And how do you feel about the hyperscalers in general because of that risk, because of how they've changed, because of how they've become more interest rate sensitive?
Yeah, I mean, even if you'd sort of take out some of the challenges here in terms of equity investments in other firms and how accretive that's been to growth, we're still seeing earnings growth that's solidly in the 20+% range here. So, we're looking at this, sort of some of these issues here around this need for liquidity, but so far it's been absorbed. And the fundamental case is there. What we've been looking at is other ways to think about investing in this, looking downstream at where those cash flows are going, who's been the receiver of that. And that's one reason that we've seen this rotation. We've been talking about areas like industrials. We've been talking about going into mid-cap stocks to get more exposure there, looking at other drivers of return, areas like infrastructure, looking at international value stocks as a way to see some diversification there. They've been on fire. So really every stock on the planet is doing well. And we think this is the great rotation that frankly is going to be one for the history books.
Jay, I want to kick this off with you. You got the Dow at a record high. S&P is flirting with it, too. What a difference a couple days make.
Yeah, it's just like we were panicked that this war was going to escalate and we were going to finally break down. And no, we recaptured key levels. We're looking at new highs, and it looks like we're going to probably get them by the end of the day. So this market has been taking the slings and arrows thrown at it and continues to move on. Earnings has been the story, and earnings continue to drive us higher.
Oh, we're going to get more into earnings. Don't you worry.
You got it.
First, Peter, though, we got a 10-year Treasury yield at 4.7%. How do you see this market overall right now, especially as you do have a lot of these things swirling above and beyond earnings, including dollar yen, which I know is something you follow closely?
Well, the interesting thing with the rise in the 10-year yield is that it's all real rates. Interestingly, inflation expectations, if you look at the 2-year, the 5-year, the 10-year, the break-evens are lower than where they were prior to the war beginning. So this is not an inflation-driven move. I think it's a lot of its debts and deficits. I think it's the huge amount of corporate supply that's coming, particularly from the hyperscalers. And 470 is above the May high, and 5%, I think, is in sight. With respect to the yen, that has a huge significance, the move, because the Japanese are the largest foreign holder of U.S. Treasuries at $1.2 trillion. So that is why Scott Bessent wants the yen to strengthen, because they do not want the U.S. Treasury market to be a source of funds for the Japanese in intervening.
Yeah, I do want to get your thoughts on that, Chris, especially because we're here from the Treasury Secretary on Squawk Box coming up in just a little bit. But also the fact that, quite frankly, the underlying data here in the U.S. has been pretty strong. Look no further than ISM manufacturing yesterday. And, of course, we're going to start getting all this labor data this week.
Yeah, the activity data that we've gotten over the past week or so has been fairly solid. There's also some tailwinds from Q2, refunds from taxes that aren't necessarily going to be a tailwind going forward. But I think if you look at domestically driven economic activity, everything looks pretty solid right now.
Okay, I said I was coming back to earnings. I'm coming back to earnings. This show has been jam-packed with a lot regarding geopolitics, national security, AI, and we'll say aerospace and defense in particular today. Yep. But it's for good reason, because all of these areas are converging right now, and we're bookended by two of the biggest dual-use technology companies in the world. Palantir earnings last night, SpaceX after the bell today.
Well, Palantir, wow. They've beat, they've guided, they've done everything right. Again, this is 3 quarters in a row. Price action, let's see if it can sustain it. Can it be Microsoft? Gap and keep going. Watch this 147, 150 level. Let's see how it closes today. If it can hold that, then this stock is where you want to be. SpaceX, what are we talking about? We're talking about the lockup, but what people are realizing, there's a big short interest here, too. I think this may be baked in. We have 2 days, but what I want to hear, path to profitability. I want to see how Tesla reacts to SpaceX earnings and how Musk is put on the spot about being CEO of both of these companies. But SpaceX is going to be fascinating to watch, and I think this may give us that entry point people on the sidelines have been waiting for to dip the toe in the water. I think I may just do that myself.
Yeah, you just said something really important, I think, for space. You have a massive amount of supply coming online. It starts Thursday. It's going to go through next year.
Yeah.
But to your point, very small float, which has been part of what's pressuring the stock with all the short interest. And you got to wonder whether perhaps a bottom is in here, at least near term.
Yeah, and that's what we're going to find out. If this can hold the recent lows, then I think this is a good floor and we can build from there. On a spike, if it gets back to that 130, 135 level, then it's time to probably take some chips off the table, reevaluate the trade, because it's still a long story to go. And this is just going to be one small step in a very big journey for SpaceX.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, Wolf says Microsoft's going to 500.
Yeah, let me just make one quick point, if I could, just in terms of Microsoft. I am not alone in looking at Microsoft as not being in a momentum name. If you look at other momentum ETFs, take your pick, MTOM, SPMO, momentum is not found in Microsoft. It's not a holding there. So over the last 12 months, Microsoft is down 9% against an S&P that's up 19%. That's a pure fact.
No, there is no disputing and debating the fact that the momentum in this name was gone.
Gone.
It was done, dead and buried.
And by the way, still gone today, even with a 25% rally.
Still gone. Because the period of uptick isn't long enough to declare that it's back.
Correct. You need to roll through the course of time.
The analogy here, to me, is where Apple was 2 months ago. 3 months ago. And I want to point out that if you go back a year ago, we were talking about Apple in a very different tone than we were 2 months ago. We were talking about the worldwide developer conferences in which there were basically duds coming out in terms of Apple Intelligence and its AI embrace. And yet, since that time a year ago, over the last 2 or 3 months, it's had one heck of a bid. I think that's a very similar analog to a fundamental discretionary manager to what's gone on with Microsoft over the last 12 months. It was looked at as a dud for many, many times. There are many reasons for it. Copilot wasn't enough. They didn't have their own model. Azure wasn't growing enough. But now it's broken out. And I think where we are with Microsoft now, not in a rules-based strategy, but in a fundamental discretionary strategy, is where people like me want to own it.
So Apple's broken out. Why in the world would you sell half of your
position? It's done. Because it's done.
No, it's not.
It's done.
No, it's not.
Yes, it
is. How do you declare it done? They have one earnings
for the next quarter.
For the next quarter.
But this is a traditional. This happens almost every time with Apple. The stock ramps into the print, and the stock sells a little bit off, and then
this isn't a little bit off. This is 10%. And first off, I sold it before the earnings because it was priced for perfection, because it had the run, and because I'm discretionary. And I look at the valuation of Apple at mid-30s, and I look at the valuation of Microsoft mid-20s, which I doubled up on back in February. And I'm always trying to go where I can buy low and sell high. And that's exactly what I did with Apple last week. I'm not going to take any heat for that. Will it get to 400, as some people say, Scott? Yes, of course it will. Not in the next quarter. It's in the penalty box for now.
I'll go to Weiss, who is literally taking monochromatic to an entirely new level today. A man who has managed to pick a shirt that matches the art, that matches the wall. Weiss, that is a skill. Congratulations to you.
Thank you. Well, this is the East Hampton vibe, so that's all I can say about that. Look, I took a different approach, which is, as I said to you and Kevin, our executive producer, on Thursday, I took the opportunity to decline in Meta to size it up considerably. I took the opportunity after Microsoft reported. I bought it. I wish I bought it before, but I bought it on the pop to size that up considerably because I see opportunity in both. If you take a look at the valuations, they're still very, very inexpensive. I mean, you've got Meta trading at 11 times EBITDA or cash flow and 17 PE. Both are at pretty good discounts to the market for these kind of stocks, the market overall in PE. So why not take that opportunity? It's the same bet I made when Meta was trading, and I've owned it for a very long time, but when Meta was trading above 600, close to 800, is that Mark Zuckerberg You know, he's going to be able to navigate this, and he's not a prisoner to any prior moves that he's made. In other words, if he doesn't think that it's working after giving it a reasonable time, he's going to get out of it. And he's got the safety net of lots of cash flow generation. So that's why I added to Meta, because it's very cheap. Microsoft, look, I don't think all the questions are answered by any means whatsoever. But what I do know, and what my view has been on cloud, which informed my adding to Google on their earnings, is that the need for cloud is going to continue to grow. It's exponential in terms of the need versus non-AI. So you're still lagging what the demands are for cloud. So both should do well. We still don't know what's going to happen in Microsoft's software business. I also bought a small trading position in Apple, which is ill-timed right now. But as we always see, you see some enthusiasm with the new Siri and with the new phones coming out, the 18 in September. So I think there's opportunities to be had. So I like being an active manager at this point. But to Joe's point, why I'm invested in Joe is because his screens will catch momentum before I catch it. So that's the benefit of it. So on any given day after earnings, you may win, you may lose. But if you take even an intermediate term approach, you'll do okay.
Yeah, but part of the issue is that now Joe can't do anything in Microsoft for the next 3 months. So what do you mean? He's going to catch momentum before you will. There's a possibility that you're going to have a renewed momentum that could literally last for the entire period that you can't do anything.
Allow me to take the other side of that. Allow me to take the side of it that says, wait a second, Joe, what you've expressed in the first 5 minutes where you seem to have personal regret that the ETF sold Microsoft and you wish that it didn't. No, you have to follow your rules. We sold Oracle, we sold Palantir, we sold Synopsys, we sold Microsoft. What did we do, Scott? We basically said the bounce in software, to Steve's point, we don't believe it. So maybe we are selling nothing more than a recovery rebound in software. When you pull back the larger trend of software, it's been a very punitive one. And a lot of people have been punished in that. We did identify in the case of Palantir, January of 25, we're in at 16. Okay, we're out now at 125.
Earnings tonight.
Earnings tonight. And it has been a stock that over the last several quarters has had remarkable earnings. But yet the reaction to earnings has not been favorable. So, look, I don't know the answer, okay? But maybe the possibility does exist that we are getting in front of what is nothing more than a rebound, recovery, bounce in software itself.
I'll come back to this in a moment because I want to get a little more on Palantir and I want to get a little more on Oracle, as you said. But I think the next thing that I want to do is what I would call an A plus B equals C, okay? In terms of the takeaways from hyperscaler earnings that we've gotten so far. The A is that Wells Fargo says hyperscalers are showing ROI, okay, that they alleviated monetization fears. So if you put that together with B, which is B of A saying that the appetite to invest remains strong, okay, that's A plus B. So you got the ROI, you got the commitment to keep spending. The C is that investors are rewarding the hyperscalers, okay? Bank of America's flow show, tech saw $15.7 billion in inflows last week. Deutsche Bank talks about a rotation back into tech having rebounded sharply after slowing.
I like the equation. I'm going to add a variable to it in a second, but I want to go a little bit more into A, B, and C. First off, you got on A, ROI. You are getting things from like Amazon saying that when they invest in a data center, they recoup all that investment in less than 3 years. That's a very strong ROI. Then B, in terms of continuing the build out, the 4 top hyperscalers are going to do roughly $750 billion of CapEx this year. That's going to $1.2 billion next year. Nobody's blinking, period. Nobody's blinking. And yes, that is leading to the hyperscalers outperforming, point C. Now, there's a little variable that we do have to consider as we go forward. We're not going to answer this today, but the financing, okay? This is a question that still looms. I know we've been talking about it a lot, but free cash flow is being used up. The debt markets are heavy with all the issuance out there. And look, we've had some good issuances of secondary equity from the likes of Google. We do have to just keep an eye on where are the funding for all of these projects coming from. It's not a worry today. It's just something to keep an eye on.